get this show on the road, everybody. You got some mics ready to go. Let's get some more questions. So Slido/WinOps, let's get some questions in for the panel. Quick introductions to the panel. First up, we've got Ed Pearson, who's a product manager for DevOps Group, gave the talk on From Project to Product. Next to him, we have Alanna Brown, the Director of Product Marketing, gave a great State of DevOps report and future security and DevOps talk. We have Theresa Miller from Cohesity, who gave the talk on, I can't remember. What did you give your talk on?
It was the practical guide to backing up.
That's right, data backup. That's right, sorry, data backup. And then Phoummala gave her talk on guardrails and Azure policy for Azure. So really, I'm gonna start with sort of a nice, soft, open question. What do you see as the next big trends, and what do you think is going to happen in sort of DevOps and cloud in the next 12 months? Anybody want to jump in?
I will.
Okay, go for it.
Security.
Security?
Yeah, I think security is going to be the number one focus and priority for almost all organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's way too many breaches happening right now. Lots of loose ends are not being tied up, and with all the fines, I mean, the British Airways fine recently, $26 million. That's not cheap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who has a spare $26 million in their back pocket?
Pays for a lot of DevOps engineers.
Yes, it does. But I really see security being a big trend and a requirement now, because it's real dollars. It's affecting businesses, and C-levels are seeing it, when it's being pushed down now to, us numbers in a company. We got to focus on it. So that's my take.
I can add to that. I completely agree on the security thing. I'm seeing more and more of it. We talked today a little bit. I think ransomware specifically is the one that's hitting organizations the hardest. Just off the top of my head, I can think of at least 5 companies I've heard of in the last 6 months. And to me, that's a lot. So even data protection products are building security into their systems to try and do early detection, even if you can't stop it on the outside. So I would agree with that.
So I think in your talk, Alanna, you spoke a lot about security. I think you talked a bit about like the different levels of security and making sure that you were secure throughout the whole, not just secure in production, but secure along the whole life cycle. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I just gave thoughts on that.
Exactly.
No, I agree. I think what I am seeing from our customers is that there is a growing awareness of security considerations, and people are trying to figure out how to make security work in their DevOps practices, because most of the organizations we work with at this point have adopted some DevOps practices, and the kind of the next frontier is incorporating security into that. The other, I think, big trend that we will see is the cloud-native landscape is exploding at the moment, and I think it'll continue to do so, and then I think over the next year or two, we'll really start to see it consolidate. There will be a lot of acquisitions and mergers happening in that space. I think the tooling will get a lot more mature, and so it'll be fun to watch.
Fantastic. Sorry, I'm just going to jump over to switch to some questions. Did you have anything you particularly wanted to add to the security topic, Ed? Or?
That's not my... No, I think...
Easy. Softball question, probably asked by somebody in my team. How does one become certified in DevOps? Well, there are a number of DevOps certifications in the market. We provide one for the BCS. I think DevOps Institute provide one. We're not really going to go into detail on that question. I think you can let me Google that for you.
I think, sorry Steve, just to interrupt, I think the one thing I would say is, I think if we're going to talk about certifications, I think we maybe need to understand what DevOps actually is and what we're talking about when we mean DevOps. And there's a distinction, I think, between becoming certified in DevOps and becoming certified in DevOps tooling.
Yeah.
And I think still a lot of organizations are not, there is still a lot of organizations in the landscape who, when you talk about DevOps, they still think that we're talking about automation tooling. And I'm not saying it's not important, but it isn't the cornerstone of DevOps in any way, shape or form.
Let me buy some DevOps, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A great big shiny box of DevOps. This question caught my eye. All these shiny things are great for projects that are new and well built. What do DevOps and transformation paradigms offer to maintainers of legacy crap? Who feels themselves in the legacy crap business? Yeah, good half of the audience. Yeah, okay. Who feels they're in a company that's only 10 years old and is maintaining a whole bunch of legacy crap already? Yeah, we have that with one of our customers. It's like, wow, you guys got crap quick. Yeah, app modernization, what do you reckon? Any thoughts?
Well, most of our customers are in the legacy crap business, I'll say. And, frankly, they're the ones that make all the money. So, what they're doing is they are really assessing each of their applications and trying to figure out which ones require which degree of automation. Some they're moving to the cloud via lift and shift. Some they are planning on re-architecting. But I think these are all like at this point in time, people can make really informed decisions about the cloud, and it's not just we have to move everything to the cloud, which is good to see.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, so the legacy crap is really hard to deal with. I've actually seen enterprises just leverage virtualization platforms to kind of contain that. Like they figure out what they can't move and what has to stay there, because you're not going to be able to get rid of it all. And then they find a way to contain it, like in a virtualization platform. And there's a lot of opportunities on-prem for that. There are opportunities in the cloud, but I'm not always seeing that happen just because it's hard to move because everything cloud is modern. So that's one observation I've had.
I also think you're going to see cloud providers offer, I don't want to say support, but help with that transition of the crap. Mm-hmm. For instance, Azure Lift and Shift with Windows Server 2008 coming into life, we're offering, an option to lift and shift your servers that you just can't upgrade right now because something legacy on that machine is preventing you to do so. Move it to Azure and you get an extended 3 years. So I think we're going to see more of providers understanding that there is crap out there. It may not be full support of everything, but helping you ease that transition. We've got tools within Azure monitoring can actually monitor across your environment, between on-premises and cloud. So slowly, it's basically hybrid is the future though, because most organizations, well, we hope that they're going to be full cloud. If they have legacy crap, they're not going to be full cloud. And you still have to support it. So we're finding ways that we can support both environments, still support the new, but understand that there's crap out there that, can't be new crap. It's got to be old crap.
Is anybody in the audience willing to admit they're still running Windows 2008 or SQL 2008 workloads? Put your hand up.
Does R2 count?
Wow.
Yeah.
Who's running NT? Boom.
All of the telemachine, all of the automatic telemachine cache points machine in the UK. That's who. Okay, it's XP embedded, but
Doesn't have internet access.
yeah. Okay. How many people are seriously worried about SQL and Windows 2008 end of life? Crapping themselves? Yeah.
Good for you.
Good. Okay.
You should be concerned.
Yeah. And ashamed.
Yeah.
And dirty. Yeah.
Microsoft
Fantastic.
has an
Right. So what do we
offering
got
for
up
that.
next? 9 votes for Lars's question. How do you see companies involving ops in DevOps more? The focus is very much on dev. Many companies seem scared of infrastructure as code. True story. We had a customer that had there was some problems in their environment, and because we'd built it as infrastructure as code, he got another company to build the same infrastructure using the Azure portal to build out the server environment, because he thought that because it was built as infrastructure as code, that was the root cause of the problem. And as much as we told him that the Azure portal calls the same APIs as Terraform or ARM templates does, he wouldn't believe us. That's the sort of some of the thinking that you have to. Sorry?
Did you get paid?
Yes. But we felt unclean. But yeah, there is some very weird thinking about that. So bringing ops into dev into ops. I mean, Ed, so Ed led a DevOps transformation at a large insurance company. You struggled with ops into dev?
I think we see more. We certainly do more work, I think, in the ops space than we do in the dev space. And I think this is a conversation that we've had, actually, is that DevOps as a movement is having way more impact on the ops teams. Because for a lot of our dev teams, if we take continuous delivery, which in some organisations is a little bit hit and miss, it's generally, business as usual. The biggest thing that we need dev teams to start doing, if we are going to start really accelerating, is getting test coverage up. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that we're seeing in dev teams that we work with. But the paradigm shift in the ops world is massive. So I think, I don't know whether it's necessarily a case of involving the ops teams more and involving companies in the ops world more. I just think there's more work to do there because it's such a paradigm shift for the way that people are used to working.
I think for each company it's going to be a little bit different. I did work in an enterprise for about a year, heavy dev, all Azure, but the staff was really quite educated, I think, on the Azure platform, and I think so there was a level of accountability there where the ops team was only involved if Microsoft case needed to be opened. So I think you can make dev sufficient if you have the right talent behind it, if that makes any sense.
I actually came from the opposite.
Yeah.
Really?
So both my prior jobs to Microsoft, DevOps, and I say that in quotes, was really run by our operations team. The server admins. We wrote all the PowerShell scripts. We did all the automation, and we had some developers help us, but the majority of the DevOps was from the infrastructure team, the VMware team, the server team, my team, the Exchange collaboration team. We DevOps Active Directory sync with all the different applications that were running our business platforms. We were doing all that, and very little actual developers helping us. And I do see a lot of organizations with that trend because operations, we just make things happen, right? How many times do you Frankenscript something? I Frankenscript a lot of things. So really DevOps is what? It's process, people, tools, right? I mean, it's operations. We make things happen. So we see it on our side, and we're just giving it a title of DevOps now. We've always really done it as a sysadmin. We made all those automation scripts, those batch files, logon scripts. When you think about it, it's sort of kind of DevOps. You're automating, a process. Somebody logging in, getting all their map drives and their printers.
You know what I realized as you were saying that, because the enterprise I was actually talking about where I saw it work really well, it was a very technical organization. So it was an ERP software company. That's why it worked, because that's the culture, right? So your scenario was more straight enterprise.
Yeah, I worked for healthcare and industrial services global organization, different ends of the spectrum, but both in the U.S., smaller shop, but lots of people, 17,000, 20, 30,000 users. So it was a decent sized organization. Mm-hmm. And the majority of the weight of managing the environment was the infrastructure team. The VMware team pretty much did everything, They had to know. I see people giggling, right? You end up being a jack of all trades. You end up learning all the applications in your VMware environment. Oh, yeah. So then you end up being the DevOps person. It's this natural progression that I've seen, but then, like you said, there's the opposite side of that.
Yeah, but I do think that it was a tech company essentially. The teams could handle it.
Just to pivot this conversation slightly, who's working in an organisation where dev might broadly be in-house, but ops is outsourced to a third party? Anybody working in that environment? Because that's something that we see a lot. It's Capgemini does the ops and the data center, or Tata or something like that. I mean, is anybody sort of on the panel had experience with sort of crossing that outsourcing boundary where there's some outsourced? hoops you have to jump? That, you know, I don't know, is there any data on sort of outsourcing in your State of DevOps
No,
report?
I don't have data on outsourcing specifically, but I can tell you anecdotally that we have a lot of customers who are trying to bring those capabilities back in-house or trying to ditch their IBM contracts or the Capgemini contracts or whatever they've been roped
Apologise
into.
to anybody who works for IBM or Capgemini in the
And
audience.
it's not something that you can do overnight, right? And like again, bringing up the airline that we work with, they have some offshore, some onshore, a little bit of everything in their entire supply chain, and it can be really challenging when they have those geographically dispersed. And so they have one offshore team working with another onshore team, and it just gets really complicated to actually make DevOps work in that kind of environment. But it can be done.
I think there's another way to look at the problem. I think we did a piece of work for a telco, and they were outsourced. And if you flip the question around a little bit and say, we're not going to get out of these contracts. We've outsourced dev to whoever over here, and we've outsourced the testing function to whoever over here. How can we use the DevOps patterns and practices and tooling to actually make this work more efficiently? So, you know, we know we're never going to hit a panacea. And one of the pieces of work we did was to build pipelines to actually connect up the third-party enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
So a dev team committing over here was deploying into was pushing into an environment that a QA team over here could then test.
Yep.
So it's not ideal, but you are compressing that 3-month handover of literally corporate handover of throwing it over the fence and making it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another way of looking at the problem.
So we got this question, how often do you see DevOps practice used for client fleet management? By that, I'm assuming you mean like Windows 10 desktop? Is that the intent of the question? What do you mean?
An anonymous person that may or may not have put that question in, yes.
Okay, great. Puppet instead of GPOs, Chocolatey instead of SCCM packaging. WinOps 20, I don't know whether it was 2017 or 2018, there was a presentation from Facebook that actually talked about how they were moving away from SCCM to actually use infrastructure as code techniques to manage their Windows desktop estate. So probably need to dig that one out. And the reason was because they wanted to use exactly the same processes that they were using for managing their Linux environments and managing their Windows environments. I don't know, has anybody in the panel really had much sort of impact on or involvement on the Windows 10 desktop side of things? Or?
Not a ton. It's interesting though, I do know of 2 enterprises in my geographic location though that were looking specifically for people who knew VMware and were starting to work with like the Puppet stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think the desire's there. I don't know how successful they were in even finding that alignment of skill set. And then there's one other that I know was dabbling with it sometime in the last year or 2, but I don't know the outcome. So I've heard of it, but success I can't comment.
And I can't think of any examples of people using Puppet for desktop. I mean, I know it happens, but I don't know any specific examples.
I definitely think, you know, anecdotally, I would say, you know, I'm not hearing a huge uptake of SCCM anymore, if you know what I mean. So I think people are finding alternative methods of managing the application deployment and the machine configuration, but I can't dive into any particular.
I think maybe for larger organizations that have a major, like a huge investment in SCCM, it may not be as quick to move to other alternatives. And a lot of it probably has to do with the staff that they currently have and, you know, and the size of their environment. So if you're using SCCM and you've got this massive environment with it, I once played an SCCM admin on TV a long time ago, and it's just very, it's huge, right? And it's confusing. And we had some experts, and they knew the environment. They had, images of systems built in like 10, 15 minutes. Boom, it was done. And I think over time we may see a shift in that in those large organizations that have those investments, but it's going to take some time. And then Microsoft also offers products too to,
Other vendors may be available.
Yeah.
I feel like the BBC.
I'm not going to bring those up, but there are other products that replace SCCM
Yeah.
or are slightly better.
What I like though is tech is kind of in this period of change. Like there are a lot of companies, like we were talking about Puppet, for example. I mean, you see innovation, right? It's creating a different thought process, and I think that in itself is very invaluable. And I even look at some of what we're doing with backups at Cohesity. It's like we're taking it to the next level. So I like seeing that out of enterprises. So whether it's being adopted yet, I don't know that matters, but change is happening, and that's what excites me.
On that line of change, though, most organizations split the responsibility. It's siloed, right? Your servers and your desktop team. They're usually not together. Totally separate teams, different worlds. Until those worlds collide, I don't see that changing too much, because the desktop team is going to be desktop team, and desktops are different than servers, especially if you have an environment that has mostly remote workers and you're using thin clients. You're not going to roll that out the same as you would a Windows server or a Linux server. There's different characteristics of that. I mean, if you've got 10,000 remote nurses that work from home using a thin client, I mean, how do you DevOps that? Right? It's difficult.
Speaking about tools, we've got this question here, so many options for infrastructure as code. How does an org even start to pick which language or tools to use? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Can I jump on this as the person who doesn't work for a tooling vendor?
Ooh! Drop the mic.
So this might not be a popular opinion, but I have a sticker on my notebook here which says a decision is better than no decision. Way too many organisations get themselves into the religious argument over which is the right or wrong tool to do a job. Do some due diligence. Talk to the teams who are going to be using the tool, pick a tool and get working with it. The longer you spend trying to make that decision, the further behind the curve you're going to be in terms of how quick this industry is moving.
Yeah.
That's
I was going to
great
say
advice.
use Bolt.
Use Bolt.
Plugs for Bolt, yeah.
Use
He's wearing a
Bolt.
shirt, so.
And it's okay
Yeah,
if you realize it's the wrong choice. Like, at least you tried it, and let's say a year or two down the road, you realize, wow, this wasn't the best tool for us. It's okay to change, because your business has probably changed too. Those processes that you initially thought worked for you, have evolved. So it's okay to switch tools. Lots of companies do it. It's probably even good to reevaluate every year, every 2 years. Is this the right product for us? Is this the right solution?
But the 2 to 3 years you spent with that wrong solution has still moved you a hell of a lot further forward than if you'd stayed trying to do it by hand. Like for the first 12, 18, 24 months, no choice is the wrong choice. Do you know what I mean? Not making a choice is the wrong choice.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I know when I've done tool evaluation, I always try to narrow it down to like the top 2 or 3. And then you need to evaluate it against your business use cases and how you're trying to use it to figure out what's best in the now, right? And everyone here is right. So make a decision for 1. 2, it may not be the tool you use in a few years, but it really, really is okay.
So we just had a follow-up on that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
So can we bring the hand held up? Go for it.
Hello? That's not working.
All right.
Shan. I was just going to ask the flip side of that. What was if your company uses just about every tool out there?
Been there too.
So the question there is, what happens if you're in an organisation that has been somewhat promiscuous in their tool choice and is using every tool on the planet?
I have some thoughts on this. So in the 2018 State of DevOps report, the first 2 stages actually are all around normalization and standardization. And the reason that's the case is because then that sets you up to actually be able to adopt DevOps practices. Because then every one-off that you have in your environment means that you have to have someone who has that specialized knowledge, can manage that thing, scale that thing, back it up, do all of that and understand it. So the less of those types of one-offs you have, the easier it'll be to adopt, innovate going forward. And so we recommend picking the tools that are going to give you the 80% use case. Like, don't add another database to your stack. You probably don't need it. Do you have one that covers 80% of what you need? Use that.
Yeah, an enterprise I worked in, we did a software audit, and found even like users were installing software on their systems because things weren't locked down. And mind you, this was about 5 years ago. I think companies are getting better at that piece. But there were over 3,000 applications. So it was actually a matter of taking deliberate effort to sit down, figure out what was duplicate, what might not be needed. And then that kind of ties right into where she went with her answer, right? You do have to consolidate, isolate. Someone has to support all that stuff. And who has time for that?
And one of our customers, they put together a really nice rationalization tool sheet where they looked at they had like 20 capabilities that they really cared about. They had mapped out all of their products and looked at the overlapping capabilities, and then they decided if this meets the 80% use case, we're going to go with this tool. And actually, it's available on the puppet.com site.
So I came from an environment that every 6 months our VP would make us go through our software. That was like everything that was installed in the company. And we had to evaluate if it was valid or not. It was a red light or green light. And every 6 months, everything that we owned in our, each department, we had to red light and green light it. And then we also had like end of life where we were getting rid of it. And originally the idea was for cost savings, because we found out through the audit that we just had a lot of overlapping software that was doing similar functions. So, let's consolidate. Let's try to, minimize how much software we had. At the end of the year, after doing software audits, 2 of them, we realized, one, there was a lot of cost savings because we were paying for support on software that nobody was using. Like, hello, that was free money that we got back.
Yeah, mostly CA products.
Actually, you are right. There was a couple there. But yeah, we consolidated, and it became a routine then. Every 6 months, just go through, hey, are we still using this? Is this still valid in our processes? And if it still is, cool, let's keep it. If not, what do we have that is similar to like the 80-20 rule? Can this application work for this? If you have one department using one application and everyone else is using this other tool, can you move them over? Because now you've got a cost savings. You're not paying support on something that's really, really old and you got one team using it for one purpose. So that does help.
Yeah.
Get rid of legacy crap.
Yeah.
So we actually went through this with a customer, and we kind of implemented a sort of a 3-layer triangle. So mandatory core, there will be one source code repository. It will be Git, and particularly it'll be GitHub. We're not going to have GitLab and this and TFS and Subversion and whatever. So some of that stuff, because having all your source code in one place and knowing how to back it up and manage it, that was mandatory. Then we had a layer of widely adopted. So, if they'd standardized on Puppet and you have a huge repo over here of Puppet playbooks and stuff that'll spin up almost all of your stacks, it's very hard for a team to come and say they want to go and use something else because, why are you going to spend 3 weeks reinventing this in Salt or something when it's ready there to go? You can't justify that. Then at the top of the pyramid, you kind of have team choice. I don't care whether you use JUnit or TestNG. Do you know what I mean? That might be a developer choice, and it's your choice at that level of what unit test framework you use, because it might be very personal to your project or what you're trying to test. I think there are some other reports that seem to be pushing this. Teams get to pick their tools. I think that might be great in sort of Wild West Silicon Valley. I don't think it meets the reality of most enterprise organizations, but I think, sometimes, does it really matter which unit test framework you use? What matters is you use a unit test framework. Sorry, Gail, did you have?
Sometimes it's good to experiment, so don't take that away from them.
Yeah.
But sometimes they realize that they implement all of the tools, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, ESC, and then realize like none of them works, and then they can see that the problem is not about the tools.
Yeah.
And they need that to realize that they need to go a bit deeper.
So what are you saying? If all 4 of the tools fail, it's not really the tools. It's not you, it's me.
I've seen it.
Okay, great.
I think we're having a great conversation there because we're talking about which tools we should be implementing, which means we're not talking about dev teams building their own tooling. Because I think the world doesn't need another run deck, and unless you're a tooling vendor, stop building tools. So don't roll your own. Whatever you're doing, it's you are not that special.
but I'm special. I'm different.
You are
Right,
special, but you are not that special.
Right, we've got time for one last question on Azure DevOps, then we're going to wrap up and say our thanks and goodbyes and head to the bar. So the last one, a lot of talks today regarding Azure DevOps. Is this becoming a strong player in the field? And what would you say, an open question for me, what would you even see as a competitor to the Azure DevOps ecosystem?
That's directed towards me. I was
Yeah.
going to say, yeah, of course I'm going to say it's a strong player. What else will I say?
It pays my mortgage.
Exactly. Yes, definitely a strong player in terms of the ease of use. Like, I'm not a developer. Like, code, yeah, whatever. I can do PowerShell, but it's easy. Like, I can actually do this without feeling like, wow, I need a bottle of Advil to actually work around this. And I think the ease of use of it is making it more popular. People are like, wow, this is something we can actually implement in our organization. And the fact that it's most likely they probably have an enterprise agreement too. And you just kind of, that transition makes it easier. It's like Active Directory, right? If you have an application that uses AD, most likely it's easier to use Azure for certain applications rather than other cloud providers. Similar type of concept. So I definitely see it being even stronger than ever as more people use it. But I'm from Microsoft, so of course I'm going to say that.
Okay then, well I'm not from Microsoft and I'm going to agree with you. And I think if we go back to the conversation that we had earlier about picking the wrong tooling, I think one of the things that Azure DevOps does brilliantly well is it allows you to effectively swap in and swap out tooling as you go. So if you commit to Azure DevOps, you're not committing to full stack Microsoft. We're going all in and drinking the Kool-Aid. I think there's a number of great examples of people taking existing pipelines, using Azure DevOps for the bits that aren't working and not doing a rip and replace on all of the stuff that is. And I think that flexibility is probably the single best thing that Azure DevOps has got going for it.
Any language, any platform, any cloud. Hey, I even know the marketing messages. Partly because we're just about to launch a whole bunch of Azure DevOps training, but and come and have a look. So the final question up here is: I was not able to secure a spot in the front row. At what time will wine and beer be served for the rest of us? In about a minute and a half, as I whip through some thank yous to everybody. Firstly, let's say thank you to our panel, everybody.